at multiple points we were driving sideways through the mud. Hey guys, so in the last video, the first mistake that I made was when I was in the tent, I failed to mention that when I was in the tent, it was not on our property, it was actually in our backyard. So if that confused anyone, I apologize. When I got up and I said, that is where we're at right now, I just meant in the tent, not actually on our property. However, a couple weeks later, I did go up to our property with two friends from church, and we got to test out the tent, the wood stove, everything. It was a long drive up. We ran into a ton of mud that we were not expecting. By the time we got up to the property, the tires had been spitting so much mud, everything was coated in mud. It was a little bit miserable, but actually in hindsight, I realized it was actually a really good thing to see what it would be like at its worst. Because had we not run into that problem, we might not have made a push to get a four-wheel drive vehicle. Right now we have a Yukon. It holds everybody and we could pull a trailer or whatever, but it's only two-wheel drive. And we've gone out there, obviously, when we went to look at it in the past before we bought it, with that vehicle, and it did just fine. However, if it ends up raining or for whatever reason, precipitation even in the winter with snow, when it melts, it gets muddy, we want the ability to get off of our property and into town if we need to do so. So actually, like a week ago, we bought a Ford Excursion. I'm gonna make another video on that. Things have been moving at the speed of light. We finally got our Starlink like yesterday, our washing machine, it's like a hand washing machine yesterday. But as far as the trip went, it was really cool to see. So I rented a truck from Turo and decided to drive up with some friends. One of my friends had his own Tacoma, and it was a nice off-road setup, so he was ready to go. And then another friend of mine, he drove up with me. And so it was really kind of cool. We got to drive up, talk on the walkie-talkies the whole way up. So like I said before, the drive out there, it's only about a 21-mile drive from the center of town. But the last 3 to 5 miles is all dirt, and when it's wet, it's super muddy, and you can't go very fast. We were at multiple points, we were driving sideways through the mud. It was a little bit fun, but also a bit crazy. It was good to see that that was the case when things are that inclement, to know that either we just need to stay back on our property and wait for things to dry up, or if there's an emergency, okay, we have a four-wheel drive vehicle, we should be totally fine in getting out and back to our property. Now the last part of the drive is up a hill that's kind of washed out, and so we had to drive up and around this road in order to get up onto the plateau part. So that was a little bit interesting. We kind of had to blaze our own trail, but we didn't have to chop down any trees or anything. We did push over a few trees, and one of my friends was able to drive past that in his truck, but the one that I was renting, they had off-road tires, but they were kind of balding. Not balding, they just didn't have the tread that they should have. They weren't new. And so I knew when I rented, I looked at it, I was like, yeah, I don't know if this is gonna do that great. So I ended up just going around and ended up making it up to the top of the hill. So one of my favorite moments is right after we got up onto that plateau, we just got out, started looking around for a campsite, and I decided to go to the edge of the property. It kind of has like, from the top looking down, it kind of has this like triangle shape. So I wanted to go out to that peak and kind of just look out over the property. And it was so cool because the wind was blowing a little bit and there was snow falling, and it was just a very peaceful and serene moment. Nobody was talking or anything like that. And we just got to like kind of absorb like, hey, this is what some of the days will be like when we're living up here. And I got to just stand there for 5 or 10 seconds and just kind of enjoy the moment. And I usually, in a day-to-day basis, I don't get to do that. Obviously, we have 4 kids. We live in a house in Tempe. You hear neighbors, with whatever power tools, landscapers, you have traffic, got the 60 and everything, and people racing down McClintock, right? So there's really not those like peaceful, serene moments where you have nature, no sound, just watching what God has created. And so that was kind of a really cool moment right when we got there. We ended up just setting up camp right away, and that was fun. All the poles were like laying in the mud, and then when you like set them down, the poles would have mud stuck in the ends, and it was a little bit of a fun disaster, I guess we could say. But once we had the tent set up and we got the wood stove put in and everything like that. We started moving the tables in and food and gear. It was kind of nice. We sat down for a second, and the funny thing is, as soon as we got the tent set up, we were gonna go hike the property and kind of look around, and it started to rain. And then from the rain, it turned into what we thought was hail. And later we found out, one of my friends asked his friend who's like a meteorologist, it's actually graupel. You can look it up, I don't wanna have to define it, but it's kind of like hail basically. And so that was going on for quite a while, and it was melting pretty quickly, and so we basically just didn't wanna go out into the storm, because as we looked around in the sky, it was very stormy, and we just didn't wanna go hiking out over this 42 acres and have to try and traipse back in that storm. And the ground was already super muddy. We had so much mud caked on our shoes that each foot weighed like an extra 5 pounds. And so it made for a fun adventure. Once the camp was set up, we waited out a little bit. We made some food. I think we had like chili dogs right off the bat, and that was kind of fun. And we did a lot of stuff on the wood stove, which was kind of cool. We made sure that we gathered as much dry wood and put it under the awning before it started to really rain. And that helped us out a lot, because it did rain most of the time that we were up there. So there actually was a point after we set up the tent that the clouds did break and it looked like the storm was going away, and that was kind of nice because we did end up getting to walk around the property, go kind of out to the edge of the property, kind of look out and see like, hey, this is where the edge of the property is, and kind of just see what it looks like, and for my friends to see what the property looks like, and then we were able to hike back up. And on the hike it was really cool because I didn't remember how much, I guess, diversity in rocks, and I know it sounds really stupid, but there were so many different kinds of rocks and soil throughout this area. And it was kind of cool because you got to see kind of those different soil and rock layers from the flood, because there's probably a 200-foot elevation change difference, and it's a pretty rapid descent, and so you get to see the actual changes, you know, from the different like clays, and then there was like this like black, you know, burnt ash type soil, right? So up there in the northeast Arizona, it's kind of like volcanic a little bit. There's petrified wood. There was all kinds of crazy stuff. So that was really cool to see. We all brought back some different cool looking rocks that we thought our kids would like, and I ended up burying them in the backyard for them to dig up the day that I got back. So that was kind of fun. That night we ended up just relaxing a little bit. We made steaks for dinner, and then I brought my Raspberry Pi that has a bunch of like Super Nintendo games and stuff like that. And so me and the other guys, we ended up playing like some Mario Kart, some Super Mario, I think Donkey Kong Country, and then me and one of the guys ended up playing like 10 levels through. It was like the Super Ninja Turtles 2 or something like that. And I hadn't played that, you know, since Pizza Mart down in Mesa here. When I was a kid, I had to have been maybe like 7 to 10 years old, right? So it's been like 25 plus years. So that was a lot of fun, and we all ended up just getting a decent night's sleep that night. The cool thing was, it was between 27 degrees and 45 degrees the whole time. 45 was the high. I think it might have gotten down to 22 that night. We kept the wood stove burning, and even before the wood stove was burning, when it was 45 degrees, with the tent closed, just with the screen open, so no canvas closed, just our body heat was keeping us warm inside. So I was either in a tank top or in a hoodie, and I was just fine. And then when we went to sleep that night, we let the wood stove burn, kind of trap some heat in there, and we opened up the top vents at the top of the tent, which allows just kind of like the smokiness to let out and keep the oxygen flowing. And we were fine that night. I had obviously like a 0-degree sleeping bag, and they keep you just fine at night. So the cool thing is knowing that it'll only be getting down into the 50s over the summer up there, which is kind of nice. So we won't have to be worrying about freezing to death even up until, you know, September timeframe. So that was kind of another cool thing that we were able to learn that I think will allow us to get by just fine up there. I do want to point out it was pretty incredible. I think that day that we drove up there, set up camp, took a hike, and I was like chopping firewood and feeding the fire and just all of that, doing dishes and cooking food. I burned an extra like 1,400 or 1,500 calories that one day from, you know, the morning waking up and loading up the truck, driving up there, setting up camp, and then doing all the camp stuff. So that's something that was good to know, because when we're up there, we're not gonna be setting up camp every day or setting up the tent, but we will be, doing this, manual labor basically every single day, chopping firewood, feeding the fire. I got to learn how the fire works as far as like, feeding it small pieces of wood to make it hotter, but it's gonna burn up faster, or, larger pieces that are gonna burn slower and not as hot. That's basically how you adjust between low, medium, and high heat. And if you have a stove at home, it's easy, you just do it from like 1 to 9, there's a setting. But you'll kind of notice that you usually use like 3, 6, or 8 or 9, right? It's usually not like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it's not actually that different from using a regular electric stove in your home. So that was encouraging to be able to see that. I was boiling water, we were cooking steaks, we were cooking hot dogs, and just on cast iron right on the top of the wood stove. At one point when it got super windy up there, so that was also another thing that we learned, is the flaps underneath, there's maybe like, 6 inches at the bottom of the tent all the way around that overhangs to allow any kind of rain or runoff to go past onto the ground. Well, that was actually flapping in and out. So what we've decided is we're probably gonna go up there in advance or the day that we get there and get a bunch of 2x6s or 2x10s and build a platform for the whole tent to go on. And this will just make it a little bit nicer so we're not walking around on dirt and mud and grass every day. It'll be more home-like. If we have a solid wood foundation, we have some rugs to put down on the ground, it'll just feel more like home. It'll be up off the ground, out of the rain. We can potentially glue, staple, tack in the sides of that tent at the bottom into the wood. If it ruins it, so be it. If it gets us through 3 or 4 months over the summer of living, then it'll be totally worth the investment. So all in all, the trip was only one night. It was kind of a long 2 days, but totally worth it. I ended up somehow finding out that at some point in the trip, I actually don't know, we somehow put a crack or a little, like 1-inch rip in the wheel well of that fairing on that side. And so I had to like work with Turo to go through my insurance or whatever and get that covered. Thankfully I had the maximum coverage, so there's nothing out of my pocket. We'll see if I notice it later on, if it increases my personal rates. But at the end of the day, it was worth, paying only like $250 or whatever it was to rent this off-road vehicle, because we didn't have something that I could take up there. Our 2-wheel drive truck probably wouldn't have made it, and then that would have also left Casey at home with the kids with no family vehicle. So obviously that wasn't an option. So it was probably, with gas and food and everything like that, maybe a $500 trip, and we got to test out everything. I got to learn that when it's windy, the smokestack tends to want to lean. We don't want that to fall under the tent and melt it or anything like that. I got to see how it's called like a ash or ember something, and it's basically this mesh that goes over the top. We got to test that out. It got super black, but it keeps the ashes from coming out and falling back down onto your tent and then catching it on fire potentially, right? So I got to mess around with that. Found out that the wood stove needs to come up off the ground because the legs are only like 14 inches maybe, and they're at an angle, 16 inches. And so it's only like 1 foot off the ground. So I was like hunched over the whole time, basically like on all fours, like I was like army crawling just to feed the fire, and then also just leaning over to cook. So we'll probably put that up on like some cinder blocks or something up off the ground, just so it's easier to access. And that'll also be okay because it'll put the smokestack a little bit higher above the tent. So at the end of the day, it was well worth the view, it was well worth the memories, it was well worth all the lessons that I learned in that one 24-hour period, because now we've had to make some adjustments and changes and decisions and moves in that direction to help us get through those kinds of that inclement weather. We kind of got a good sample in a short period of time, so I'm actually grateful to God that that all did happen and it didn't go smoothly, because then we'd go up there, run into these problems and be like, oh crap, I wish I would have known about all this. So guys, in the next video, I'm actually gonna be talking about the aftermath, what we had to deal with basically what we came back to regarding the tent. There was a lot of work getting it ready to go back up there so that the tent wouldn't be ruined. It was almost a $2,000 investment, I think, including the wood stove. So that's something that we definitely want to protect and be able to use long-term, either for resale or just continued use for the next decade. So guys, thanks for watching another episode of Little House on the Plateau, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.